Welcome to class, everyone. Today's essential questions are, should I start learning Mandarin? Is Elon Musk going to be the first emperor of Mars? And why spend money on space stuff? I'm your host today. I'm Mr. Ebbers, and I keep forgetting holidays like Sweetest Day and St. Nick's Day because I never grew up with them. But sorry, honey, my wife, I keep forgetting them. Also joining us is Mr. Walter.
I didn't know what either of those days were. I just want that to be known. I'm Ben Walter, and instead of writing my physics exam, I'm recording this podcast. I don't have the exam. I don't have the answer key.
He's really hoping for a snow day tomorrow.
That's tomorrow. This will come out in a while, and that won't make contextual sense, but oh well.
We're going with it.
It won't be the last physics exam you give. I'm Mr. Linton, and I currently have a mustache.
We'll put up a picture, maybe. Despite all this, we are still the smartest guys.
It's already going to be on my passport. That's good enough.
Smartest guys in the classroom. Ladies and gentlemen, today you heard the essential questions. The overall topic for today is the new space race. This is a topic that I'm very excited about. I will probably have to control myself in how much I say to make sure my co-hosts, my fellow teachers, also get a word in edgewise. So, we are going to be talking about the new space race. What was the old space race? We're going to give some historical context. I've got some stuff to say, but I'm sure Mr. Linton, our resident history teacher, will also chime in with his insights. So, we're taking it back to the 1950s. We got a proxy competition between the U.S. and the USSR to see what economic and government system could produce the best thinkers and apply those skills to achieve unimaginable technological goals. And space was going to be one of those fields upon which there was the competition.
Yeah, if you don't want to shoot guns at each other because that sounds like it's going to kill too many people, you can just have a competition to see who can build the bigger rocket.
Russia comes out of the gate swinging. They had, I forget his first name, but his last name is Korolev, who's an absolute boss at designing rockets, but not just a boss at designing rockets. He knew how to play.
I am boss man of Russia.
He actually was in a gulag for a while, but then I don't know who bailed him out or how that worked, but he was one of the absolute best minds when it came to rocket design, but also just in manipulating the political system to give him money, because he sold it as he wanted just to make rockets for making rockets' sake. He and his U.S. counterpart, Wernher von Braun, I'm actually wearing his name tag. There is a student. There's a student, parent or grandparent family of the school that we teach at. They donated a big Lego Saturn V, and along with it, a McDonnell Douglas pin with Wernher von Braun, W. von Braun, for when Wernher von Braun visited Douglas for the manufacturing of one of the stages of the Saturn V. So this is an authentic historical artifact that I'm holding currently, and its value is, I'm not sure, but we're going to make sure it stays safe. Anyway,
I'm sure someone would pay something for that.
Yeah, but it donated to the school, so I'm not going to.
And that person would be a nerd.
Anywho, we've got these two rocket designers, Wernher von Braun, Korolev, and they have the ideals of making bigger rockets to explore space. They want to get to the moon. They want to get to Mars. They're willing to pander to the U.S. government, U.S. military, and the Russian government, the Russian military, to do it. So they sell it as, well, we've got nuclear weapons now. The country that has the best rockets, the biggest rockets, can deliver the biggest payloads to bomb the other country potentially, or to...
Yeah, and then I'll be able to blow up their country 58 times, and they can only blow up my country 52 times.
Yeah, and Russia... So this is the space race, the original space race. Russia comes out with a lot of firsts. First satellite, first animal, first person in orbit, first woman in orbit, first spacewalk. I think that's all the ones that are on. They were also, I think, the first to photograph the dark side of the moon. They were first to crash into the moon. I mean,
You
screaming
can keep that one. You can keep that one, Russia.
Yeah. Anyway, so we've got JFK comes in as president in 1960, correct?
We will not do these things because they are easy, but because they are hard.
And one of the things he kind of goats the American public into is like there's this missile gap. We gotta bridge the missile gap between the U.S. and the USSR, which there really wasn't much evidence for a missile gap, from what I can tell.
I am nodding along in this completely audio medium.
Anyway, and then the Russians are making all this firsts in the space race, and JFK goes to his advisors and he asks, okay, what can we do to one up the Russians? And it'll be like the crowning achievement of the space race. I need some ideas of what could be achievable within a 10-year, like a decade time frame, even beyond his administration, because at most his administration would go to 68, getting elected in 60. And they throw out a couple of different options, like space station, going around the moon, landing on the moon, and by happenstance or they felt like landing on the moon was the most technically achievable. That would make the biggest impact, getting the most bang for your buck. And so enter the Apollo program.
Is it also true, Mr. Linton, that part of the incentive to get to the moon was that we thought that Russia wanted to build a base on it? So we wanted to plant a flag there first to be able to say, you don't have jurisdiction here if we had to.
Yeah, I have no idea.
Okay, great.
I have never heard that before. I think after we said we're going to land a person on the moon and bring them back, I think the Russians then were playing catch up with that. They had their own lunar program, and I'll mention this now. Korolev, who was the big guy getting all this going for the Russians, he ended up dying by all accounts because of stress, because of how much stress this is. And his time in the Gulag probably did not do anything to increase his lifespan. So he ends up dying and some underlings take over, but they are arguing they don't have the same type of influence he does. The Russian
rocket.
the Russian program kind of peters out toward the end of the 60s. But as we all know, well, NASA gets good funding. John F. Kennedy is assassinated, and this dream of landing a man on the moon now becomes like an imperative to avenge our fallen president. Would that be accurate in saying, Mr. Linton?
Well, I was just sitting here thinking, and this is probably actually a good transition to where you're headed, but I might be spoilering, but whatever. I'm so enamored with the concept that you could rally the American people behind anything. You know, like even if something so like seemingly insignificant in the grand scheme of things as stepping foot on the moon, what does that do for me as a rando living in West Bend, Wisconsin?
Well, it's a giant leap for all mankind.
I understand, but we like hated the Russians so much. Like we had, as a country, we had made our core identity that communism is the worst thing ever in the history of ever. And so our core identity is hating communism, and we hated communism so much that we were going to go to the moon.
To the moon.
Yes. So where I
wanted to go further, right? We wanted to go to Mars, but the program kind of petered out after.
Von Braun wanted to go to Mars. Yeah.
Yeah.
They had architecture for bigger rockets. There was a Nova rocket that was like an evolution of the Saturn V. There was the Sea Dragon, which was just a massive rocket with like one single massive engine bell. They'd launch it from underwater. They'd partially sink it, then light it underwater because it was so massive. Any launch infrastructure you could make on land, it would pretty much be destroyed by this hypothetical rocket's thrust.
So you would create a hurricane every time you launch a rocket by evaporating so much water.
Now we're going to be talking about weather modification again. That's one of the conspiracy theories. Anyway, so NASA gets all this funding. I forget what percentage of the national budget it is, but it had never been higher. It never has been higher since then. And through some bumps, there is the Apollo 1 disaster where we lose 3 astronauts during a test on the pad. That was Apollo 1 was very early on. And
first, you might say.
Yeah. And they, like, a lot of those astronauts were slated to be, or kind of the favored to be, the first people to walk on the moon, but when they ended up dying in that accident. But over those bumps, they were able, obviously, to land. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, and, well, they were landed on the moon. Mike Collins orbited in 1969, in July of 1969, if I remember correctly. And so we won, in a manner of speaking, and we did it several times after that. We did Apollo 12. Apollo 13 was the successful failure where they had the explosion of the oxygen tank and had to jerry-rig their way back to Earth using duct tape and all these interesting maneuvers. Watch Apollo 13 if you want to see a dramatization of that. And we go all the way out to Apollo 17, and they had hardware for Apollo 20, out to Apollo 20. They recycled some of it for Skylab, which was a space station that they used for a couple missions, and then it went wrong and it deorbited itself. And we had the space shuttle, but that was just low Earth orbit cargo, and that was also fraught with difficulties, having lost 2 crew during Challenger and Columbia. And now we don't have the space shuttle anymore. We're just using commercial partners from Boeing and SpaceX, although the Boeing one is not doing so hot at the time of this recording.
What, Boeing is not doing so hot? I have not heard anything about Boeing struggling in any way, shape, or form.
I haven't heard about any astronauts stranded in space now until spring.
Yeah.
It got pushed even further to bring them back.
So that brings us up to the present day. And so that brings me to, what is the new space race? And the new space race, I have it in a couple different parts. For one, back to the moon. We want to get back to the moon, and we want to stay there longer. Why do we want to go back to the moon in the first place? Well, China and Russia also want to go back to the moon. So we do kind of have our old adversaries in a way. On the moon, you have a couple different things that you can do there. You've got helium-3, which could be used for fission reactors if we ever get that going here back on Earth. The idea of just making permanent bases there as kind of like an Antarctica, like not surrogate, but as a analogy to Antarctica, where we're just studying how we can live in more and more harsh environments where we're only 2 to 4 days away from Earth and only 1 light second of communication from Earth, as opposed to Mars, which would be another jumping off point where we are 6 to 9 months.
I believe the closest point is 6 months.
6 to 9 months.
And when it's out of phase with Earth, it is much farther.
Yeah, with the way orbital mechanics works, you don't travel in a straight line. You travel in orbit out to, and you kind of either are chasing Mars or you go out and let Mars catch up to you. And so, yeah, it's a longer journey with traditional chemical rockets, which is what the architecture that we have right now. And then by that point, you are not talking seconds of latency between communicating at light speed. You're talking minutes, at least like 8 to 10, at most like 20 to 30 minutes. And that's one way. So there's no two-way communication that you can do feasibly when you're out at Mars. Could I say the demarcation between
Say whatever you want, Derek.
the lines in the sand? We've got.
If you could make up a word that says that same thing, that would actually be really great. Because it would, again, make Ben really mad.
I'm not that good. Anyway, we've got Canada, the EU, India, the US. So a lot of our allies are in this. Actually, a lot of countries have signed these Artemis Accords. That's the new program. In the 60s, we had Apollo. Now we have Artemis is the new program to get us back to the moon. Russia has aligned themselves a little bit more with China. China has made a lot of strides in their space program. They currently have an operational and personed space station, and has been. They've had people on orbit for a couple of years now, I think. And in fact, Russia was lobbying China to put it on an orbital inclination, so that Russia could also visit it, because I think the orbital inclination they have now does not allow for Russia to go to their Tiangong space station. I think it's how it's pronounced, what it's called. Anyway.
I don't know.
I mentioned Artemis is the program that the U.S. and all these other countries are trying to get back to the moon. We're also trying to get to Mars. China and Russia, they've also announced plans for a moon base by the 2030s.
Yeah.
Currently, Artemis has launched one mission, Artemis 1. There have been a lot of other missions kind of tangential to it to test out different technology and different orbits. But they launched the Orion spacecraft around the moon, brought it back, had some problems with the heat shield. They're going to try to change the reentry corridor so that's not blowing off chunks of the heat shield.
Yeah, that's probably preferable.
Yeah, you don't want...
Are heat shields important?
In fact, they are.
Yes. As you come into reentry, there's is it an ideal gas law?
Adiabatic heating, is that what you're talking about?
Pressure, volume, and temperature are related. That's ideal gas law, right?
Combined, but if you throw in some other things, you got ideal.
You are coming into the atmosphere so fast that you condense the air in front of you to the point that it heats up into plasma. Mm-hmm. So heat shields, for people who don't know, are super important to keep you not crispy.
Quiznos.
So that you don't become Quiznosed. Toasty.
Is Quiznos? Do they still exist?
I don't know if they do, but that's a phrase I've been using for a long time.
The one in my hometown, I think, is out of business.
But anyways, a very popular way of doing heat shield is ablative.
Ablative heat shield,
where the heat shield...
I got... Sandwiches got me thinking. And can I just say, I hate Subway.
Really?
Yeah, look. I don't understand why people eat there. Okay? Like, their ads try to sell it as some kind of healthy option. Fun fact for you, in Ireland, they are not even allowed to call their bread because the sugar content is too high. Ooh. And Ireland has said they have to classify it as like some kind of confection. This is a true fact, okay? So Ireland has a rule about what qualifies as bread, and it says that the sugar to flour ratio can't be more than 2%. Subway's is 10%.
Very enriched dough.
Yeah, so it's not, they say it cannot be bread, so it's not healthy, all right? I can get past it if there's actually something interesting on the menu, but there's nothing interesting on the menu because they expect you to create your own menu. How am I supposed to know what sandwich sounds good? I walk in there and they look at me expectantly. They're sandwich artists. I'm sorry, if I'm the one telling you exactly what to put on that bread, you are not an artist. This is basically AI-generated art. I put the prompt in and they make something. That is not art.
AI-generated lunch.
Also, I just want to say, it used to be, okay, I got $5. I can get a foot long. If I didn't have a lot of money, it was a good option. It may not have tasted good, but I was full after eating it. They do not sell $5 footlongs anymore. They're $10. And so, in conclusion, it isn't healthy. It doesn't taste good, and it certainly isn't a value anymore. So why do they even exist?
A-.
I'll give that a B+.
That's pretty solid. I mean, they do have menu items, though.
I do actually like the meatball subs at Subway.
That's like the worst one, isn't it? It's over 1,000 calories.
Who cares? Who cares? I'm 150 pounds soaking wet.
For you, that's fine.
I can eat 1,000 calories in a meal.
Where we left off before the sandwich intervention was
No one expects the Sandwich Inquisition.
we are talking about the new space race and getting back to the moon and to Mars. The major players, another major player, apart from big government agencies, are private partners. Probably the biggest name, of course, is SpaceX.
We haven't done that in a while.
We haven't done that in a while.
To do it.
But SpaceX is, if you've been living under a rock for the past several years, is a company that makes rockets, and they make a lot of other products like Starlink satellites, which can now beam you internet pretty much anywhere on the world if you're willing to pay for one of their antennas and pay for the service. And they also are now offering direct-to-cell service. So if you have a compatible device, you can. There's just starting to roll it out now, where you can have your cell phone communicate with the Starlink satellites, which are almost always above you, so you won't technically have to worry about ever being out of cell range if you have this compatibility.
Unless there happens to be a cloud.
No, I think it works through clouds. Now,
A really thick cloud.
A hurricane, perhaps.
anyway, so we've got these private partners as well. SpaceX is not really a competitor to NASA, as some people mistakenly believe. SpaceX is kind of like what Boeing and McDonnell Douglas used to be. They are contractors for NASA. NASA contracts out to SpaceX and a lot of other companies to make the rockets and to make these missions possible, though now the relationships have changed a little bit. They use now. Actually, we won't get into the fixed price versus cost plus contract pricing schemes. That's a little bit too deep.
Yeah, let's not.
Let's not talk about the minutia.
My eyes started glazing over as you were describing what we were about to skip.
Some people might be bored enough by the science. We don't need to throw economics into it too.
For the nerds out there. Anyway, we're talking about what is the same and what is the difference between this space race and the last space race. I've got some thoughts. I'd love to hear your thoughts, gentlemen. We have kind of roughly the same East versus West vibe. Putin, I would say, from what I've read and heard, he actually doesn't have much love for the Communist Party. He saw them as failing the Russian country and the Russian people. He kind of sees himself as a continuation of the czars, and he wants that czarist glory for Russia. And if you look at what he's done through that lens, I'm not defending what he's done, but it does start to make you kind of understand where he's coming from. Again, don't agree with what he's done, but give you some context there.
No, I think that holds up historically, especially if you study Russian history. One of the big things the czars were so focused on was a freshwater port and access to the Mediterranean, right? So look at what Putin's done, seizing Crimea, because that is something that they have wanted since there were czars, like access to that. And I think that is a good lens to kind of, the fact that he was a KGB agent probably gives him this layer of Cold War ideology and communism, but I think you probably described it more accurately, that czarist power. I think the idea of political power or political parties is probably abhorrent to him, because it's just this unity. I am Russia and Russia is me.
Yep. And China wants to assert itself as a global superpower. It wants to be better than the U.S. on the global stage. Just like before, space is a very good way to show that to the world. And China has been launching rockets like crazy. We outmass stuff sent to space only because of SpaceX sending Starlink satellites. If there were no Starlink satellites and very little other of SpaceX activity, China probably would be outmassing the amount of stuff sent into space against the whole world. So there's that. There's that new dynamic that we have.
I think you'd explore it a little bit through a lens of like new imperialism too. Since the beginning of the creation of the idea of nations have been seeking a way to test themselves against the world, right? Whether it be colonies in Africa and Asia, or then you get the space race, the original space race, and other technological breakthroughs. I think this could be another manifestation of that. I think you could also look at it through access to minerals and chips and lithium and all that other things too. So that fits.
Yeah. For my capstone in college, I wrote a paper, which I'm sure we'll come back to at some point.
For sure.
But one of the things that we had to do for this was send out a survey and ask people what they thought about different aspects of our topic. And I was talking about colonizing space. And one of the fascinating things that came back was that from the people that I polled, of which I got about 250 responses back.
That's really good.
From at the college I was at and outside of the college. So I polled secular and religious people. 2.5% stated that the primary purpose for extraterrestrial colonization was, quote, divine right.
Manifest destiny?
Divine right.
Divine right.
Was that you gave that as an option, or they came up with that on their own?
I don't remember if I gave it as an option. I don't think I did. I think they listed something along the lines of manifest destiny or it is our right or...
Okay, so they didn't necessarily use the word divine. You categorized it as divine right.
I think I may have categorized it as divine right. But what else could you categorize that as?
No, I think it's great. The fact I was imagining 2.5% of people on their own all using that same phrase, and I was like, "What in the what?"
But yes, 2.5%.
On the other hand, I can imagine you using that phrase. So
saying, "Yeah, we own these stars. We were born here, therefore, all of that is mine," which is either really American or really human, depending how you look at it.
I think Western. I think is a Western mindset?
Right. Yeah, probably. And
Squatters' rights?
in the whole, quick mental math, only 37% of the people I polled were opposed to colonization. So vast majority said yes. And this was 2021, so this is a few years ago now. And I'm sure stuff has shifted.
I'm going to go back to now. What's different about this new space race between us, I'll say, U.S. and Russia and China? First point, the U.S. doesn't have the same motivation. I will make that claim.
Yeah.
I already made that claim.
You already made that claim. Like, that is a once in a nation's history moment.
What you said something. You said, unless you've been living under a rock, in reference to SpaceX. I would bet half of Americans have never heard of SpaceX.
Yeah, it's probably depressingly correct. I'm just so in that world.
Yeah.
That I guess I assume that more people know about it. I guess, how many people know about Elon Musk and his association with SpaceX?
I think more people know about Elon Musk, but they probably just know about it because X.
X and
Or the Doge task force.
Oh, welcome to America.
Look at NASA's budget. Nowhere near, adjusting for inflation, looking at percentage of the U.S. federal budget, nowhere near the percentages of the 60s. And yeah, so don't have the same motivation, doesn't have the same national fervor.
You'd have to sell it, right? And I think we'll talk about this concept, but I wonder if the 1950s and 1960s, some people might refer to those as a sort of American golden age, where people generally were optimistic about their own futures, the chances that the economics of their own family were going to get better, that things were going well for them and would continue to do so in the future. And does that status make it more possible to look outside of yourself towards a larger goal like landing on the moon? If you have people who are saying, I don't get paid enough at my job, I can't find a home to live in, if that economic environment is less optimistic, I think you probably find people who are like, why are we spending money on going to Mars when I can't find a house to live in?
Yeah.
Correct. There was, if you want to talk about this next, I have a couple things, well, maybe one or two things to say
I'll
about that.
introduce it first, and then I'll.
There was, from what I can tell, a similar movement during the 60s, especially with the civil rights, that there were groups that were protesting Apollo missions because we need to figure out the problems on Earth before we try to do anything in space. There was one quote from some administrator in NASA. He said, if I could flip a switch and trade off disbanding NASA, stopping the whole shebang so that we could have civil rights figured out and everything would be corrected, he would do it. But it's not that simple. And so that sentiment of space versus domestic problems has been going on ever since we've been dumping a lot of money into space exploration. And that is a sentiment that we see today.
I think it's worth noting that even though we do dump a lot of money into space, we dump a lot more money into a lot of other things, right? Like space is a very small piece of the pie compared to a lot of other things. And most of the research that goes into space is a product of other things, namely weapons research.
Yeah.
Or produces spin-offs for us that we do benefit from.
Right.
For the record, I 100% buy into that concept. I think the extra challenge that we face now is they've already ratcheted that down so much that it's not a matter of continuing to sell the existing spending levels. You would have to sell a significant increase, which I think is the harder part.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what the new administration does. There are people in Congress that want to try to increase the budget for NASA because they see it as a new space race. Like, we have to be back to the moon before Russia and China. They're trying to play off that fear to increase budget, increase the money so that we can do it. There's also this new versus old. So we've got SpaceX is the new, Boeing is the old. We've got all this infrastructure that was developed during the 60s, and all those companies, all those facilities got used to that pipeline of money. And I think it's accurate to say that a lot of people in Congress who have those people as their constituents have tried their best to fund NASA in a way so that policy stays consistent, where we're favoring the old infrastructure, the old way of doing things, so that the money keeps flowing into my constituents' pockets, which is a conflict that a lot of people want to see gone because they see that old way as being slower, more bogged down. They see SpaceX as like they've seen a lot of progress with what they can do in the past 5 years. I mean, really, what they've done in the past 3 years with their new rocket has been actually quite amazing, regardless of who you are. I'm talking about the Starship and Super Heavy, that specific rocket, which is the most powerful rocket. It's got like 2.5 times the thrust of the Saturn V that took the astronauts to the moon in the 1960s. They see that as like, we need to be doing things this way and not the old way. We need to kind of free up the money, free up the procedures so that we can do this in a timely fashion.
I guess, okay, so again, I'm the space outsider here because this is not an area of study for me. what is the goal of low space orbit and being there? What does it accomplish?
As much as I've read and heard, research that benefits us back home, you can only do certain experiments in low gravity, microgravity. And then as another thing is to test out technology that would allow us to stay in space indefinitely. So technology that would allow us to go to the moon and stay there for longer periods of time, go to Mars and stay there for longer periods of time, which, I forgot to mention this earlier, SpaceX, their main tagline or mission statement is to make life multiplanetary. So either with NASA as a contractor for NASA or just on their own, they're raising a lot of money and capital just by working for NASA, doing the Starlink thing. They hope to start colonies of their own on Mars. And this is Elon's dream, so that we don't just have people living on Earth, because he sees life on Earth as fragile and something that we need to spread to take care of ourselves, to be our own saviors, if you will.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I also think profit is part of it, but
Yeah, probably. Probably the money plays in a little bit too. I've got some questions for you, gentlemen. It's 3 parts, but I'm going to give it all to you at once. Would you move to a space station or visit, let's say visit or move to permanently, space station, the moon, or Mars? You could say yes or no to anyone, and I'd appreciate to hear your thoughts on why yes or no.
before we talk about that, can I talk about some of the potential hazards or problems with doing that?
You can do that now, sure, because we were going to either do that before or after this.
So we've talked about the economic and political factors of doing this, but what about like the medical factors, shall we say? There's a surprising amount. Research that I've done previously, and this is not stuff that really changes over time, so I'm pretty confident that these percentages and numbers are pretty good. But when you go to space, you are in zero gravity. Well, you experience weightlessness, let's put it that way.
We're
more
pedantic.
physically correct.
We're pedantic because we know physics.
I'm a pedantic curmudgeon. When your body loses focus on anything, say you break your leg and then you're not standing on your leg for a month, your body says, oh, we're not using that. Let's just get rid of some of that and use it elsewhere, right? The muscles atrophy. You might heal, but then you have to go through physical therapy and everything after the fact. Same thing happens in weightlessness, but everywhere. So once from the moment you start zero gravity, within the first 24 hours, a passenger can expect a 17% reduction in plasma, 10% net loss in blood volume, and a significant reduction in lymphocyte activation, along with 60 to 70% removal of all of the calcium in your body via urination and feces.
That all sounds bad.
That is all bad.
Yeah, I think calcium's important, right?
Yes, so that leads to a 2% drop in bone density in the first month and 8% to 12% after 6 months. So that is an exponential increase in your bones just becoming chalk, which is not great. After the first 2 weeks, muscles atrophy up to 20% and 30% by the end of 6 months. You can have more personalized symptoms. Ooh, fun. Nausea, motion sickness, loss of vision.
This is starting to sound like a drug commercial.
Yes, occasionally.
Can you read it in like the drug voice?
Side effects may include going blind because your optic nerve doesn't have any weight on it anymore. That might be permanent, just so you know. It's recommended currently by NASA that you have to do 2.5 hours of intensive exercise per day just to combat the muscle atrophy and the blood and bone loss. So I would rather die than that. As much as I love the idea of going to space, I would rather shrivel up and die than do 2.5 hours of intensive exercise per day. Maybe that's just me.
Quick aside, I did see a great post on formerly Twitter, but it's now called
X.
that we've been in we've been in space, we've been in low Earth orbit for so long. Why haven't we been trying to create artificial gravity? And we're not talking about like sci-fi artificial gravity. You just have to spin your spacecraft. It could be as simple as connecting two capsules together with a tether and giving yourself a little bit of angular momentum. And the tether keeps taut. And you have, just as if you have a long enough tether, you don't need to really spin yourself all that fast to get close to 1G of Earth gravity, which would help combat a lot of these health effects.
But you're spinning the whole time, so some people get motion sickness, inner ear problems, etc. So even the solutions we have aren't perfect for everyone. So what this leads to is you would have to be very selective about the types of people, which we are currently. But if you're trying to start a colony, SpaceX wants millions on Mars. If you're trying to start a colony of millions, good luck with all of the criteria you have to meet. On top of that, there's kind of a bigger elephant in the room, which is that if you want to create a colony, your colony is too far away. Unless it's on the moon, your colony is too far away for you to be able to get to it in the event of an emergency, which means it has to be completely self-sustaining. And that ties into reproduction. Okay. Currently, NASA has forbidden reproduction in space. Scootily pooping. In space, I'll use that term from now on. It's also an issue if you're trying to get to something like Mars, because you have to limit the amount of stuff you take with you. Every kilogram that you take with you saves like hundreds of thousands of dollars in fuel. Right? Every kilogram you leave behind. So if you are only taking enough for the people you have with you, and then suddenly a new baby shows up, you might start having to stretch resources thin. Also, we don't really know what happens to babies in zero-G when they're developing. There have been tests done by Russia and by the United States. We know it increases the amount of stillbirths. Babies that are born successfully have a much harder time figuring out gravity once they're introduced to gravity. So if you're born en route and then you get to Mars and you have to figure out, oh, this way's up and this way is down, that didn't form properly.
Are these tests these are tests with animals?
They did these with mice. And rats, yeah.
They haven't done this with humans yet.
Thanks for that disclaimer.
Yes.
I was like, okay, Russia, U.S.
But also, there's a lot of radiation, especially in space. So you have an increase in complications there. Also, Mars has no atmosphere, so you've got increased radiation there.
Very, very thin atmosphere.
Right. So you've got an increase of cancer all around, which, I mean, who cares? We're all going to get cancer anyway at this point. But you've got an increase there. But what do you do en route, right? SpaceX wants 1 million people. Okay, 1 million colonists that you're telling not to do. What was the verbiage you used?
Scootily pooping.
Scootily pooping. You're asking 1 million colonists not to scootily poop on the ride. And these are not all professionals like we currently have at NASA. Contraceptives have a failure rate of 9%. So if everyone was scootily pooping, you could have upwards of 45,000 pregnancies. If only 10% were scootily pooping and you had that 9% failure rate, you've still got 450 babies en route.
Out of a total population of what?
1 million.
1 million, okay.
So 450 isn't bad, but that's 450 potential deaths of mothers and or children while you're trying to get there still.
During all of this, Derek has just looked sadder and sadder. He's like, I had this optimistic question that was going to be fun, like, you want to live in a space station?
And then
Ben's like, you can't.
What about
you'll die?
What about the soul-crushing psychological effects of claustrophobia and dealing with that one guy for 6 months?
Claustrophobia?
Claustrophobia. Don't ask me about my pronunciations.
How's that English language coming along, Mr. Walter?
I adore the English language. However, you know this. My pronunciations of the English language are vastly different from most of the people in this vicinity. I got insulted for saying Nevada today.
I was there, true
for
story.
calling a semi a lorry, for
because you're an undercover Brit.
for saying schedule.
Also undercover Brit.
Anyways, tangents aside, that's before you get to issues like food and live soil and anything like that. I mean, there's always cannibalism, right? But that would be less than preferable.
I think that comes with its own risks.
And then you get to law and order. There is no jurisdiction. There is no precedent. There is nothing for space. So if someone commits a crime while you're starting a colony up, where do you put them? Are you wasting resources to build prisons? Do you just execute them right out the airlock? Do you extradite them to Earth? How much is that costing you to send a rocket with one prisoner back to Earth? We have no precedence for any of this. So all of that considered, now, Mr. Linton, would you like to do this?
Look, even before you said any of that, my answer was going to be no.
Oh, so I wasted a lot of airtime, didn't I?
Well, no, you might have persuaded some of our listeners against the dangers of when they were thinking of signing up for the Mars expedition later in life. I don't know. Look, it's not because the concept of space travel is interesting and it's fascinating, but I'm afraid of heights, and that feels like it's really high.
It's weird. I would rather go to space than go into the ocean. Like, if
dive into the ocean?
I would rather go to space than a submarine, but they're essentially the same thing, right?
I would for sure rather, given the choice, all expenses paid, you go to Mariner Deep, Challenger Deep versus a couple orbits. I would probably take space over Challenger Deep. And
I don't know why that is, because they're equally claustrophobic
and inhospitable
and terrifying.
Except, well, you can see a lot more from space. The view,
I suppose.
The view from space would be a lot better.
You can see a giant squid.
Only if it got real close.
Only if it got concerningly close. But honestly, after all of my tirade of I would rather die than do exercise, I think I would like to go someplace, I think I would like to go to Mars.
Wait, okay.
But I don't.
I can at Elon, Ben Walter.
I think I would like this.
For Mars.
As long as he doesn't have to exercise.
As long as I don't have to exercise. I mean, 6 months I'm going to have to exercise. But I would hate that part of it. But I think enough of it might be rewarding enough to make it worth the effort,
Let the record show that Mr. Walter is the only one who's single of the three of us.
Yes. Yeah, I've got nothing to lose. Right? Exercise is temporary, pain is forever. That's what they always say.
That latency issue from the Mars might make it a little difficult for us to record a podcast.
True.
Yeah. See,
I would stay on a space station for a short amount of time, or stay on orbit for a short amount of time, but I'd want to come back home. Same thing, I'd visit the moon. Mars is, with the current distance, I mean, who's going to be visiting Mars?
I think I would much rather go to the moon than to Mars. But if the option is this is where we're going to colonize Mars, and the moon seems like it's going to be more of a research base than an actual life center. I think it would be okay. I could make that decision.
I always tell my students I'm looking forward to lunar sports. Send some sports teams up to the moon when we get the habitation modules up, and then we can see what sports in 1/6 gravity look like. Like
cricket.
What sports will we invent or modify so that they will work?
Cricket already makes little enough sense that we could.
If you watch a video, cricket actually does make a lot of sense. I did go into that rabbit hole for a bit. If you need me to explain cricket to you later,
let's do it.
Let's not right now. Closing thoughts on the new space race. Is this just expansion for expansion's sake? I'm just going to leave that hanging as a maybe unanswered question, but something for you to think about. Many people have a very romantic view of going to space, me included. Just take your favorite space sci-fi, Star Wars, Star Trek. If you want a little bit more realistic potential future of what colonizing the solar system looks like, watch The Expanse. It used to be a sci-fi show. Now,
first 3 seasons are just perfection.
Yeah, it is adult content, but it is, and there is some slight spoilers. There is some alien weirdness that gets in there, but the setup, the world that it happens in, is very believable. The technology is very believable. Works under known laws of physics. Going to space will be similar to other expansions. There will be some people who benefit and some people who suffer. There's been the fallacy that some people believe that we will all become rich if we go mine an asteroid and bring back all the gold, all the silver, all the platinum, and that'll just increase the economic output of the whole Earth if we're able to mine the asteroids. It's not going to work like that. It takes money to get there. It takes money to bring it back. It takes money to refine it. And the money just doesn't magically go to your bank account when one company does that. That's not how it works. Our utopia will not be found among the stars. That's going to be my hot take. It will not make everyone rich. It will not solve our problems back on Earth. But will it be cool? I mean, I'm really excited for Artemis as kind of a hodgepodge program as it is. I'm excited with what SpaceX does. I don't agree with everything that Elon believes about space travel, but his rockets are cool. I love watching the launches. I love them trying to catch boosters out of midair. Just the engineering that takes place, the science that NASA does is invaluable still for us here on Earth. And so I'm excited. It is a fun time to be a fan of space. Mr. Walter.
I would have to agree. The current state of it is kind of a hodgepodge, and we are definitely going eventually, unless the Lord comes first. What that looks like and when that looks like, we don't exactly know now. And everyone's disagreeing about everything. The Artemis mission especially, you mentioned it's kind of a hodgepodge. Destin from Smarter Every Day had an excellent talk where he went over, hey, why are you doing this? And why are you doing it this way? And there's a lot of great insight to...
It was kind of a nice condemning view of why it is the way it is.
Yeah, and it's not condemning going there in the first place, but just... hey, if we're going to do this, let's do it right. Let's make smart decisions and let's make this actually work. From the Christian point of view, like you said, our utopia is not found in the stars. But as Christians, we can't just say, hey, they want to colonize Mars. Fine, let them all go. We'll all stay here. If this is... some people have likened it to a new Tower of Babel, in that this is our new way to kind of stick it to God and get out there. Whether or not you like it, the tower's going to be built. And if we're not there, then there's no one to save any of the souls on those planets, so you're condemning an entire branch of humanity to hell. I hate to put it that way. But as a Christian... it feels almost like an obligation to follow where people go to make sure that souls can be saved.
Missionaries followed pretty quickly behind the other explorers and settlers of North America?
Exactly. So I feel, on some degree, even if I hated the idea of going to Mars, I feel like in some level it's our duty.
I think about this concept as, space, the final frontier, right? But it's not. It's not the final frontier. I think what excites people about this is that it is the frontier that they are interested in. I think maybe what is core to the human experience, and we understand from a very young age, is this desire to test what is possible. What is it possible for humans to do? And for some people that manifests in space exploration. For some people it manifests in how big of a weight can I lift? But all of those, whatever it might be, is an attempt to try to see what is possible. And we all have our frontiers that we want to test and we want to push forward. And I think that's good and that's healthy. And it's a way for us to become the best version of ourselves that we can possibly be. And so my homework for you is to figure out what your frontier is and then invest in it and push yourself to become the best version of yourself that you can possibly be.
That's
beautiful.
So wholesome.
That's very beautiful. I'm kind of glad Mr. Walter didn't come up with homework and then we gave it to Mr. Linton this time. Mr. Walter,
Thanks
you'll
for
have
calling me out like
you're gonna,
that.
You're gonna have to redeem yourself sometime.
Great. Can't wait.
Mr. Walter, thank you though for your insight. That was if you didn't catch it, that was a capstone project that Mr. Walter did from his days at Martin Luther College.
A couple of years ago.
That gave us all that great insight on the ethics and the nitty-gritty of colonizing space. Ladies and gentlemen, I've been your host. This has been your class. Class is dismissed. Nerd!